We've already looked at India's momentous turn to its modern identity as a nation-state that shook off colonial rule. We saw how artists like Abanindranath Tagore revitalized India's art as a national expression of a cultural heritage. Tagore rejected British models of art and presented traditional Indian culture as the great mother figure of Indian consciousness. He also founded the Indian Society of Oriental Art to promote these ideas and to educate a new generation of Indian artists. One of his most creative pupils was Mira Mukherjee, born in 1923, who died in 1998. Like Noguchi and Hasegawa, she moved between her indigenous South Asian traditions and global modernism, ultimately synthesizing them. So she studied in Europe, she studied art in Europe, and then came back to Asia, to South Asia, to consciously revitalize the tradition that was her heritage. Her most famous sculpture is a sculpture of Ashoka at Kalinga, that important historical moment. And she uses the historical traditions of monumental and figurative sculpture that we have studied again and again. Her Ashoka is about twice life-sized. It's cast from 26 bronze sections. Obviously, she's celebrating Ashoka as one of the great historical figures of enlightened rule and of India as the birthplace of the Buddha Dharma, as the sanctity of the Buddha Dharma. But she's also using bronze casting itself very thoughtfully to renew and revitalize the technical skills of lost wax casting that we learned about when we studied figurative bronze sculpture in the Chola dynasty. Her way of embodying Ashoka shows an interest in European modernism, which it had explored expressive distortions, swelling forms, angular forms, a visual language that heightens the expressive power of the body. But she also considered herself an anthropologist, recording the folk art knowledge of bronze casters who had passed down centuries and centuries and millennia of tradition. She apprenticed herself to a Bastar tribe in the forests of central India. And she actually considered herself to be an anthropologist as well as an artist who was recording and preserving the knowledge, folk knowledge, and traditional knowledge of India. Another fascinating figure of diaspora and cross-cultural exchange is Anish Kapoor. Born in 1954, he grew up in the age of Indian independence, post-colonial India. He was educated in India, but he went to England, the former colonizer. He went to England for his art education, and that has been his base ever since. So he's very much an example of the complexities of cultural exchange in a post-colonial era. This work, As if to celebrate, I discovered a mountain blooming with red flowers, was made in 1981 for the Whitechapel Art Gallery. And it is, again, drawing on traditions that are reimagined in a modern global context. So these forms are built out of deep red and gold pigment powder. And so they are actually the kind of materials that are used in the Hindu temple practices of puja, of worship, in which includes pigments and red gold garlands offered to the deity in an act of devotion. Now, the triple conical forms definitely evoke the temple, right? The visual language of the temple as a mountain that protects the womb of the earth, which we learned about when we studied northern and southern style temples. At the same time, when Kapoor uses basic geometric coherent shapes that are stripped of ornament in a reductive way, he's engaging with the New York modernist trends of minimalism and with abstraction. And note how a minimalist artist like Donald Judd will often use repeated forms made out of industrial materials because that's also influencing Kapoor. One of Anish Kapoor's most compelling sculptures is titled Cloudgate. It engages deeply with New York minimalism, right? With the idea of industrial materials and the minimalist idea of an artwork that seems closer to non-art than to art. So the construction of this industrial form required advanced computer engineering, right? So this is not handmade sculpture like the lost wax method of bronze casting. This is a technological feat. And he needed advanced computer modeling because he's designing a curved metallic surface that acts as a mirror of the sky, the Chicago skyline that you see reflected in it, the ground, and the viewers. People are often very interested in how this kind of seamless surface was made, and that is interesting, but it's not really the most important thing in terms of the effect of the sculpture. Because the effect really has to do with your interpersonal, your embodied experience of it if you go to Chicago and you approach it. So it's monumental in its size, right? So it's more on the scale of a temple than a figurative sculpture like Mukherjee's. Kapoor is drawing from the South Asian tradition of monumental sacred spaces, this curved form that you can actually move into has the secrecy and inwardness of a Chaitya hall. Kapoor refers to the structure as the omphalos, O-M-P-H-O-L-O-S. That means the center or hub of everything. It comes from the Greek idea of the navel of the earth. So it's a navel, it's a belly button. And this very much chimes with the Hindu temple as a meeting of the linga and the yoni. Its organic yet abstract form evokes maybe an embryo or an eye to suggest the beginning of things, but also the visual domain itself. Most importantly, as I said, as a viewer, you don't look at it. You engage with it. You walk around it, you enter it, and it seems to be looking back at you because it's reflecting. So much as the Hindu temple centered on darshan, eye contact with the deity, you are aware of yourself seeing and being seen. Here's what Kapoor says about his intention. What I wanted to do in Millennium Park, that's the location of Cloudgate, is to make something that would engage the Chicago skyline so that one will see the clouds kind of floating in, with those very tall buildings reflected in the work. And then, since it's in the form of a gate, the participant, the viewer, will be able to enter into this very deep chamber that does, in a way, the same thing to one's reflection as the exterior of the piece is doing to the reflection of the city around.